Orchestrated original story framework with new characters, plot structure, and emotional beats. Orchestrated original story framework with new characters, plot structure, and emotional beats. The first time the lobby went quiet, it was because a man in a $4,000 suit was screaming at a nurse, and nobody knew whether to laugh or look away. Wren Dalton had been on her feet for 11 hours. Her left clog had a crack near the toe that whistled when she walked fast, and she had learned to walk fast because the night shift in the emergency department at St. Laint, Bridget Mercy, did not slow down for anyone, least of all a 31-year-old charge nurse with 38 years of debt and a habit of giving away her lunch to the people in the waiting room who looked hungriest. She was carrying a paper cup of ginger ale to a kid with the flu when Grant Whitmore decided she was the reason his evening had gone wrong. "You?" he said. "You. Hey, I'm talking to you." She turned. People always remembered afterward how calm her face was. They mistook it for arrogance or stupidity or some kind of fog. It was neither. It was the face of a woman who had been screamed at by far more frightening men in far worse places, and who had learned that the only thing screaming wanted was a reaction, and so she gave it none. "Sir," she said, "can I help you?" Grant Whitmore was 36 and looked 29 because money does that to a face. His father's name was on the new cardiac wing carved into limestone above the revolving door, and Grant wore that fact the way other men wore cologne. He'd come in 2 hours earlier with his girlfriend, who had sprained her ankle stepping off a curb outside a wine bar. And he had been informed, gently and then less gently, that a sprained ankle does not jump the line ahead of a man having a stroke, or a toddler who had swallowed a battery, or the woman in Bay 4 whose heart Wren had personally restarted 90 minutes ago with her own 2 hands. "Help me," Grant said. He laughed, and a few people in the waiting room laughed with him because that's what crowds do. "You can't even do your actual job. We have been sitting here 2 hours. Do you know who my father is?" "I do, sir." "Then maybe you should act like it." Wren set the ginger ale on the counter so it wouldn't spill. "Your girlfriend is being seen by the triage team. A sprain is painful, and I'm sorry she's hurting, but it isn't life-threatening, and tonight we have several patients who are." It was the wrong word. Several, because it implied that other people existed, and Grant Whitmore had organized his entire life around the principle that they did not. He stepped close to her. Too close. She could smell the wine on him, and the citrus of whatever he'd put in his hair. "You're a nurse?" he said, and he made the word sound like something scraped off a shoe. "You wipe up vomit for a living. Don't lecture me about who's important." A younger nurse named Priya started forward, and Wren caught her eye and shook her head, barely a half-inch. "Not worth it. Don't." That was when Grant reached out and knocked the clipboard out of Wren's hands. It clattered to the floor. The charts inside it fanned out across the tile, somebody's lab results, somebody's discharge papers, a child's drawing that an old man in Bay 6 had given her because he had no one else to give it to. The whole lobby went silent the way a room does right before something breaks. 40 people pretending to read their phones, all watching. "Pick it up," Grant said. Wren looked at him. "I said pick it up." His voice cracked higher. He was enjoying it now. You could see it. He had an audience, and his father's name was on the wall, and there was nothing in his world that had ever told him no and meant it. "On your knees. You think you're better than me? You're not. You're the help. Pick it up." And here is the thing that the security camera caught, the thing that would be watched 4 million times in the following 10 days. Wren Dalton knelt. She got down on the cracked tile in her cracked clog, and she began, calmly, to gather the scattered pages, the lab results, and the discharge orders, and the child's crayon drawing of a yellow sun. And she did it without hurrying and without looking up, because a long time ago, in a place she did not talk about, she had learned that you can kneel in the dirt and still be the most dangerous person in the room. What nobody in that lobby knew, not Grant, not Priya, not the old man in Bay 6, was that there was a reason Wren Dalton did not flinch when men screamed. There was a reason her hands were steady when she gathered those pages. And that reason was about to walk through the sliding glass doors of the St. Bridget Mercy Emergency Department on 4 legs 83 pounds of blackened tatten certainty, nose already up, already searching, because dogs do not forget the people who saved them. But that was 4 minutes away. We have to go back, first, to understand why it mattered. 6 years before that night, Wren Dalton had not been a nurse. She had been a Navy hospital corpsman attached to a Marine Special Operations team, which is the polite institutional way of saying she was a 25-year-old woman who ran toward gunfire to put other people's bodies back together. She had not joined for patriotism exactly, though she had her share of that. She had joined because her mother had died of an aneurysm in a kitchen in Dayton, while Wren, 15 years old, dialed 911 with shaking hands and could not do one single useful thing, and Wren had decided, with the terrible clarity of a grieving teenager, that she would never again be the person in the room who could not help. So she learned to help. She learned it in classrooms, and then she learned it in the back of helicopters, and once, memorably, in a dry riverbed in a country whose name still made her jaw tighten, where a senior chief named Cole Vance had taken 2 rounds through the thigh and his femoral artery had opened up like a faucet, and Wren had jammed her fist into the wound and held the artery closed with her bare fingers for 19 minutes while the bird came in, talking to him the entire time about absolutely nothing, about his daughter's soccer team, about the worst meal he'd ever eaten, about whether a hot dog was a sandwich, because she had read somewhere that the sound of a calm voice can keep a man's heart from giving up even when his body wants to. Cole Vance lived. That was the first time. The second time was Atlas. Atlas was a multi-purpose canine, a German shepherd with a Belgian mother and a temperament like a coiled spring, and he belonged to a seal named Eli Cardinal, and on a night Wren still saw sometimes behind her eyelids. An IED had gone off under the lead vehicle and Eli had been thrown clear. But Atlas had not. The dog was pinned, bleeding, his back leg crushed under a door panel, and he was doing the thing wounded working dogs do, which is the worst sound in the world. Not whimpering, but trying not to, swallowing it down, because they are trained to be silent, and they hold to that training even while they're dying. Eli Cardinal could not get to him. Eli had a piece of shrapnel in his shoulder the size of a thumb, and 2 corpsmen holding him down so he wouldn't bleed out trying to crawl to his dog. And it was Wren. Small, fast Wren with the steady hands, who went into the smoke for a dog she'd known for 3 weeks, who lifted a door panel that should have been too heavy for her, who packed the wound and splinted the leg with a tent pole in her own belt and carried 83 pounds of shaking shepherd 400 meters to the casualty collection point, with rounds still snapping overhead. Atlas lived too. He kept the leg. He walked with a hitch in his gait afterward, a little dip on the left that you'd only notice if you were looking. Eli Cardinal noticed everything about that dog, and the last thing he had said to Wren before they medevaced him out, gray-faced, gripping her wrist hard enough to bruise, was, "He won't forget you. Shepherds don't. Whatever happens, he's got your face in him now. Forever." She had thought it was the morphine talking. She had filed it away with all the other things men said when they thought they were dying. She did not see Eli Cardinal again. She did not see Atlas again. Her enlistment ended. She came home to a country that did not know what to do with her, took her trauma training and her steady hands and her 2 confirmed lives in her own private wreckage, and she funneled all of it into nursing school, because it was the only thing that had ever made the noise in her head quiet down. She did not tell people about the war. She wore long sleeves over the scar on her forearm where Atlas had clamped down once, in his panic, before he understood she was helping. She made herself small. She made herself the help. It was easier. Which is how she came to be kneeling on the floor of the St. Bridget Mercy Emergency Department, gathering a child's drawing of a yellow sun while a man in a $4,000 suit told her she was nothing. The sliding doors opened. 2 things happened at once, and afterward people argued about the order, but the cameras settled it. First, a man walked in, tall, mid-30s, with the kind of squared-off bearing that civilian clothes can never quite hide, a faint silver line of an old scar through one eyebrow, a service dog harness leash wrapped twice around his fist. He'd come in for the most ordinary reason in the world. His shoulder, the old shoulder, had been seizing up for a week, and his VA appointment was 11 days out, and his sister had finally badgered him into getting it looked at. He had no idea Ren Dalton existed within 500 miles of him. He had no idea of anything except that his shoulder hurt and he hated hospitals. And second, the dog at the end of the leash stopped. Atlas stopped the way a current stops, all at once and from the front. His head came up. His nose worked the air, the recycled hospital air full of antiseptic and floor wax, and 40 strangers and one scent threaded through all of it, a scent his body had been carrying for 6 years the way Ren carried the scar on her arm. He made a sound nobody who knew working dogs would ever forget. Not a bark. A whine pitched up into something almost like a word, and then he hit the end of the leash so hard that Eli Cardinal, 3-time combat decorated, 210 pounds, stumbled forward a full step. "Atlas," Eli said. "Atlas, heal what?" The dog did not heal. For the first time in 6 years of impeccable, disciplined, parade ground obedience, Atlas blew through a command like it was nothing, because some things are stronger than training, and he crossed that lobby in 4 bounds with his nails skittering on the tile, the bad leg dipping, and he did not go for Grant Whitmore, did not go for any of the 40 staring strangers. He went straight to the woman kneeling on the floor, and he buried his entire head against her chest, and he screamed. There is no other word for the sound a dog makes when it finds the person it had given up on finding. It is grief and joy braided together so tight you can't pull them apart. Atlas pressed his whole body into Ren Dalton and made that sound over and over, and his tail was not wagging, it was beating. It was hammering the air. And Ren, who had not cried in front of another human being in 6 years, who had held a man's artery closed with her bare fingers without her voice shaking. Ren Dalton dropped the child's drawing and wrapped both arms around 83 pounds of shaking dog and broke completely apart. "Atlas," she said. It came out wrecked. "Atlas. Oh my God, it's you." The lobby did not understand. How could it? They saw a nurse, who'd just been ordered to her knees by a rich man, suddenly weeping into a service dog who had crossed the room like the building was on fire. Grant Whitmore certainly did not understand, and because he did not understand, and because his entire personality was a defense against the experience of not understanding, he did the stupidest thing he had done in an evening of stupid things. "Get this animal under control," he snapped, "before I have it put down. This is a hospital. It's filthy. It's a health hazard. I'll have all your jobs." And he reached down, toward the dog, toward the back of the dog's neck, the way a man reaches when he intends to grab. 3 things stopped him. The first was Atlas himself, who turned his head and looked at Grant Whitmore, and the sound that came out of him then was the opposite of the sound he'd made for Ren, a sound that started somewhere down near the foundation of the building. And every primate instinct in every person in that lobby fired at once and took 2 steps back. The second was Ren's hand, flat on the dog's chest. "Atlas," she said, very quietly. "Off. Stand down." And the dog stood down, instantly, completely, vibrating with the held want of it, but obedient, because she had spoken to him in the cadence he'd been raised on, and that, more than the tears, more than the embrace, was the thing that made Eli Cardinal, crossing the lobby now, stop dead in his tracks. Because only one kind of person speaks to a multi-purpose canine in that exact cadence. And Eli Cardinal had spent 6 years wondering what had happened to the corpsman who carried his dog out of the smoke. The third thing that stopped Grant Whitmore was Eli's voice. He did not raise it. Men who have actually been to war almost never raise their voices. They have learned that the quiet ones are the ones you watch. "Don't," Eli said. "Touch the dog." Grant turned, ready to unload on whoever this was, ready to invoke his father and the limestone over the door. And then he got a good look at the man, and at the look on the man's face. And some animal part of Grant Whitmore that had been carefully starved his whole life suddenly woke up and informed him urgently that this was a different category of person than the ones he was used to bullying. "This is none of your," Grant started. "You knocked her charts on the floor." Eli's voice stayed level. He had stopped a few feet away. Atlas had repositioned himself, without being told, so that his body was between Wren and Grant, leaning his weight against her knee. I watched it on the camera feed in the parking lot, on the monitor by the door. You made a hospital nurse get on her knees in front of a room full of people. And then you threatened to kill a working dog. In a hospital. He tilted his head. You want to tell me again how none of this is my business? Do you know who my father? I don't care, Eli said, who your father is. And the lobby, which had been holding its breath, let out something that was almost a laugh, almost a cheer, the sound a crowd makes when the wind changes. But it was Wren who ended it. She got to her feet. She was not crying anymore, or she was, but it had become a different kind of crying, the kind that runs down a steady face. She kept one hand in Atlas's fur, and she looked at Grant Whitmore, finally, fully, the way she had not let herself look at him this whole time, and Grant felt the floor of his certainty drop away beneath him, because the woman he had decided was nothing, was looking at him like she could see every soft and frightened thing he had ever hidden behind his father's money. My name, she said, is Petty Officer Wren Dalton. United States Navy, hospital corpsman, retired. This dog's name is Atlas. 6 years ago, in a place we've never heard of, I carried him 400 meters out of a kill zone with a crushed leg, while people were trying very hard to make sure neither of us came home. Her voice did not shake. I have knelt on much worse floors than this one, for much better reasons than you. So no, I'm not picking up the clipboard because you told me to. I already picked it up. Because there's a child's drawing in it, and a man in Bay 6 who has no one gave it to me, and it matters more than you do. You could have heard a pin drop. You could have heard the ginger ale fizzing in its paper cup on the counter. Grant Whitmore opened his mouth, and what came out was nothing, a kind of gulping nothing. And then his girlfriend, who had been watching the entire thing from the triage doorway, balanced on her sprained ankle, with an expression that had been curdling from embarrassment into something much colder, said, very clearly into the silence, Grant, we're done. Don't call me. And she limped out the doors past Eli and Atlas, and she did not look back. It would be nice to say that was the end of Grant Whitmore, that he slunk away and was never heard from again. The truth was messier, the way it is. He did invoke his father. He filed a complaint that very night. He demanded Wren be fired, demanded the dog be reported, demanded, and for about 36 hours, while the hospital's lawyers reviewed the footage and the HR department drafted careful emails, it actually looked like he might win, because that is how the world frequently works, and Wren Dalton was nobody's idea of a person with power. Except that the old man in Bay 6 was named Walt Brennan, and Walt Brennan was 84, and Walt Brennan had spent 19 years as a beat cop and then a detective in a city that did not give out medals for it. And Walt Brennan had watched the whole thing from the doorway of his bay, where he'd shuffled out to find the nurse supine to him. And Walt Brennan still knew, by name, 3 reporters who owed him favors. And the security footage, which the hospital was so careful about, had a way the next morning of being on every phone in the metro area before the lawyers had finished their coffee. 4 million views in 10 days. The clip had a name by then, the way these things do. People called it The Nurse Who Knelt, and then, after the part with the dog, they called it something else. The Dog Who Remembered. They watched Atlas cross that lobby 10,000 times. They watched Wren Dalton's calm face the entire time Grant Whitmore screamed at her, and then they watched it break apart against the neck of an 83-pound shepherd. And the comments were a country talking to itself about who it actually valued. The hospital, which had been preparing to manage Wren as a liability, discovered overnight that it had a hero on staff, and changed its entire posture so fast you could practically hear the gears strip. There was a statement. There was a commendation. Grant Whitmore's complaint evaporated. His father, it turned out, was a great many things, but he was not a stupid man, and a stupid man's son screaming at a decorated combat corpsman in front of 4 million people was not a fight the limestone over the door could win. But here's the part that the 4 million views mostly missed, because it happened off camera, and it was the part that actually mattered. Eli Cardinal did not leave that night. He sat in the waiting room of the St. Bridget Mercy Emergency Department for 6 hours, his shoulder forgotten, Atlas's leash slack in his hand. While Wren finished a shift she refused to abandon because there were patients in those bays. And a sprained ankle and a viral video did not change the fact that the old man in Bay 6 needed his evening meds, and the toddler had to be watched, and the woman whose heart she'd restarted needed her hand held at 4 in the morning when the fear came back. Eli watched her do all of it. He watched her be the help, the way she decided to be the help at 15 years old in a kitchen in Dayton. And every time she passed through the waiting room, Atlas's head came up and his tail started its hammer beat, and he watched her with the bottomless, uncomplicated devotion of a creature who had decided 6 years ago in the smoke exactly who his person was, and had simply been waiting all this time to be reunited with her. When she finally came out at 7 in the morning, gray with exhaustion, Eli was still there. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "I did, actually." He stood. The shoulder twinged. He ignored it. "He won't get back in the truck without you. I tried, around 4. He set all 4 feet and looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Eli almost smiled. "I told you that day, shepherds don't forget. I just." He stopped. His jaw worked. He was not a man who had a lot of words for the large things. "I looked for you. After. I tried to find out who carried him out. Nobody could tell me your name. They just said it was one of the corpsmen, and there were a lot of corpsmen. And then I was in rehab for a year, and you'd gotten out, and—" He shook his head. 6 years. He's been waiting 6 years for you, and I didn't even know your name to thank you. Wren looked down at Atlas, who was leaning his whole weight against her shins, eyes half closed, the bad leg tucked, content in a way he had apparently not been for a very long time. "I thought about him," she said quietly. "I thought about both of you. I didn't think." Her voice caught. "I made myself small after. It seemed safer. I let people think I was nothing because it was easier than explaining what I'd been." She put her hand on the dog's head. "I forgot I used to be the kind of person who runs into the smoke." "You knelt on that floor," Eli said, "and you still had the whole room. You didn't forget anything. You just stopped letting people see it." There was a long quiet then, the kind that 2 people who have both been to terrible places can sit inside comfortably while a dog breathes between them. "He needs to retire," Eli said finally. "Atlas. The leg. He's got maybe a year of work left in him, and the VA's been on me about a forever home. A quiet one. Somebody who—" He stopped. He looked at her. He was a man who jumped out of airplanes for a living, and he could not, for the life of him, find a way to say the obvious thing. And so Wren, who had always been braver than she let herself believe, said it for him. "He's got one," she said. "If you'll let me, he's got one with me. The both of you do, if it comes to that." And Atlas, who could not possibly have understood the words, lifted his head off her shins and looked up at the 2 of them standing over him, and his tail began, slowly, and then not slowly at all, to beat against the floor of the St. Bridget Mercy Emergency Department, like he'd been waiting 6 years to hear exactly that, which, in every way that counts, he had. They did not fall into each other's arms. This isn't that kind of story, and Wren Dalton was not that kind of woman. And Eli Cardinal had a year of physical therapy and a lifetime of his own wreckage to sort through. What they fell into was slower and better. Coffee, at first, and then standing dog-leash conversations in a park near the hospital while Atlas hitched along on his bad leg, sniffing at everything like the world was new. He taught her how to take the seizing out of her own shoulders. She had her own old injuries, it turned out, that she'd never let anyone look at. She sat with him in the bad gray hours when the smoke came back behind his eyes, and she talked to him about nothing, about soccer teams and the worst meal he'd ever eaten, and whether a hot dog was a sandwich, in the exact calm cadence she'd once used to keep a senior chief's heart from quitting, because she had read somewhere, a long time ago, that the sound of a steady voice can keep a person from giving up even when their body wants to. Atlas slept at the foot of her bed. He no longer flinched at doors. Grant Whitmore, for the record, was fine, That's the part people always want and rarely get. The dramatic comeuppance. The ruin. He wasn't ruined. He kept his money and his condo and his father's name over the door, but something had cracked open in that lobby that he could not seal back up. Some understanding of how he looked from the outside, and he was a smaller man afterward in the eyes of everyone who'd seen the video, which was a great many people. And that, for a man whose entire life was built on being seen as large, was its own kind of sentence, and it was permanent, and he would carry it the way Atlas carried the hitch in his leg. A small dip in his gait, noticeable only if you were looking. People were always looking now. The clip is still up if you want to find it. 4 million and counting. People leave new comments on it all the time, from Tucson and Buffalo and a small town in Maine and a suburb of Sacramento. Strangers telling each other where they're watching from, telling each other to be kind, telling each other to be kind, telling each other that you never, ever know who is kneeling on the floor in front of you, or what they carried out of the smoke once, or who is about to walk through the door and remember them. But Ren Dalton doesn't watch it. She doesn't need to. She was there. She knows exactly what it cost and exactly what it gave back. And most mornings now she wakes up before her alarm to the weight of an old war dog pressed against her legs and the sound of him breathing easy. And she lies there in the gray light and she thinks, not about the man who told her she was nothing, but about a riverbed 6 years and a whole life ago, and a thing a dying man told her that she dismissed as morphine. He won't forget you, Eli Cardinal had said. He's got your face in him now. Forever. He'd been right. He'd been right about all of it. And on the floor of an emergency room in front of a room full of strangers, on the worst kind of night, the dog she'd saved had crossed the distance of 6 years to prove it, and in doing so had given Ren Dalton back the one thing she'd lost, somewhere between the smoke and the small life she built to hide inside. The simple, unkillable knowledge that she had never, not for one single day, been nothing at all. I keep coming back to the floor. Not the dog, not the man in the suit, the floor. The cracked tile. The ginger ale fizzing on the counter. A woman on her knees gathering a child's crayon drawing while 40 strangers watched and said nothing. For a long time, I thought that moment was about humiliation. I was wrong. It was about a choice, and Ren Dalton made it before Atlas ever crossed that lobby. Here is what I finally understood. Grant Whitmore had money, a name carved in limestone, every advantage a person can be handed at birth, and none of it held, because it had never been earned. And the things you don't earn don't hold weight when the room goes quiet. What Rem had, she had built with her own hands, in the worst places a person can stand. That's the difference no suit can buy. The world keeps trying to teach us that loud equals strong, that wealth equals worth. It doesn't. The quietest person in that hallway turned out to be the one who'd carried 83 pounds of dying dog 400 meters through gunfire, and the loudest one couldn't even hold a clipboard with grace. So I think about what actually saved her, and it wasn't luck. It was 3 things she'd been quietly building for years, the way you build anything that lasts. She'd built a spine, the kind that lets you kneel on a floor and lose nothing of yourself, because your value was never sitting in someone else's opinion. She'd built a clear eye. She read Grant for exactly what he was in 3 seconds and refused to feed the part of him that wanted a fight, and that restraint is its own kind of intelligence, the kind that knows which battles are real, and she'd built a quiet decency that never asked for credit, the kind that picks up a lonely old man's drawing because it matters more than the man screaming at her. Atlas didn't cross that room for a hero. He crossed it for the person who'd run into the smoke when no one was watching. That's the part I want to hold on to. Nobody was watching 6 years ago when Ren earned the thing that walked back into her life on 4 legs. The lobby came later. The cameras came later. The recognition always comes later, if it comes at all. And you have to do the right thing long before anyone's looking, or you'll never be the kind of person it finds. I'm not telling you to go to war. I'm telling you that the small, unwitnessed choices are the ones that become who you are. Keep your word when it costs you. See people clearly, especially the ones the room has decided don't count. And when they put you on your knees, gather what matters and stand up steady. Because someday, when you least expect it, the smoke clears and something you saved a long time ago comes running back to remind you exactly who you were the whole time.